Have you ever wondered about the woman who walks away? Not in a storm of fury, not with slammed doors and shouted ultimatums, but in silence. A silence so profound, so complete, it feels louder than any argument. She is the woman who, after years of trying, of bending, of shrinking, simply stops. She puts down the heavy weight of a relationship that was never truly hers to carry alone. And she turns, not towards another person, but inward, towards a vast, uncharted territory within herself. The world has many names for this woman. She is called bitter, jaded, difficult, cold. They say she has given up on love. They whisper that she must be lonely, a tragic figure in a self-imposed exile. But this is a profound misunderstanding, a projection born from a society that is deeply uncomfortable with female wholeness. The answer isn't that she has given up on love. The truth, far more unsettling to the status quo, is that she has finally given up on suffering for it. She has stopped accepting a distorted, conditional, fragmented version of connection and has begun the sacred, terrifying, and ultimately liberating journey towards something else entirely. This journey has a name, a term given to it by the renowned psychologist Carl Jung. He called it individuation. It is not a path of isolation, but of integration. It is not about building walls, but about dismantling the false structures within. It is the process of becoming an individual, meaning literally, undivided. It is the conscious quest to become the person one was always meant to be, to shed the skins of parental expectation, societal conditioning, and relational trauma, and to finally stand whole and sovereign in one's own psychic space. This woman's departure is not an ending. It is the true beginning. It is the first courageous step into the wilderness of her own soul, a declaration that she would rather be whole and alone than fractured in the company of another. She is not running away from love. She is running toward herself, and in doing so, she redefines the very meaning of power, of peace, and of what it means to be truly, irrevocably alive. Her silence is not emptiness. It is the fertile ground from which a new consciousness is about to be born. Before this silence, her life was a symphony of noise. She was a woman who loved until she lost herself, who saw love not as a partnership between two whole individuals, but as a desperate act of fusion. She was one half of a whole, always searching for the missing piece, believing that another person held the key to her own completion. She mistook attachment for intimacy, dependency for devotion. Her love was a form of self-abandonment, a constant negotiation of her own needs in exchange for the promise of not being left. She would listen for hours to his problems, becoming a vessel for his pain, his ambitions, his unresolved anger, while her own inner world became a ghost town, its streets silent and its buildings hollow. She was the queen of justification, an architect of elaborate excuses for behavior that chipped away at her soul. "He's just stressed," she would tell herself. "He doesn't mean it. It's just his way." She became fluent in the language of diminishment, translating blatant disrespect into bad moods and emotional neglect into needing space. She carried the emotional labor for two, managing his feelings, anticipating his needs, tiptoeing around his triggers, all while her own went utterly unnourished. The relationships were a repeating script, a toxic echo chamber where the characters changed but the plot remained brutally the same. She was drawn, with the unnerving precision of a compass needle pointing to a magnetic pole, to the unconscious man. The man who lived on the surface of his own life, terrified of the depths. The man who projected his unhealed mother wounds onto her, expecting her to be both a Madonna and a maid, a therapist and a goddess, but never ever a full human being with needs of her own. He would utter the classic phrases, the red flags she painted white. "All my exes were crazy," he would say, a convenient narrative that absolved him of any and all responsibility, a chilling preview of how she, too, would one day be described. "You're too sensitive," he would accuse, whenever her feelings became an inconvenient mirror to his own emotional illiteracy. Or the most insidious of all, the passive-aggressive abdication of responsibility. "Do whatever you want," a phrase that sounds like freedom but is, in fact, a cage, a test to see if she would dare to have a desire that did not center around him. She existed in a state of perpetual audition, constantly proving her worth, her loyalty, her low-maintenance nature, begging for crumbs of affection and calling it a feast. She didn't realize that she was starving. She didn't realize that the hunger was not for him, but for herself. The awakening is never a single cinematic moment. It is not a lightning strike of revelation. It is a slow, grueling, and deeply private war. It begins when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of change. It is born from the accumulation of 1,000 tiny paper cuts to the soul, 1,000 moments of being misunderstood, dismissed, or ignored. It is the point at which the disappointments stop hurting and start teaching. The turning point for her was a moment of stark, brutal clarity. She looked at the landscape of her life, at the repeating patterns of her relationships, and she was forced to confront the one common denominator in all of it: herself. Her willingness to participate, her acceptance of the unacceptable, her belief that she had to earn the love that should have been freely given. It was a horrifying and simultaneously liberating realization. It meant that the power to change the pattern was not out there, in finding a better man, but in becoming a different woman. And so began the descent. Jung knew that the path to individuation leads not up into the light, but first down, into the darkness of the personal and collective unconscious. To become whole, one must confront the shadow. And her shadow was vast. It was the repository of everything she had been taught to repress as a good woman. Her anger, her ambition, her boundaries, her raw, untamed power. She had to sit with the ghost of the girl who learned that her value was in being pleasing, the teenager who learned that her desire was shameful, the young woman who learned that her needs were an inconvenience. She had to face her own capacity for self-deception, her addiction to the romantic fantasy, her terror of her own solitude. This was not a pretty process of face masks and bubble baths. Marketed as self-care, this was shadow work. It was ugly crying on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. It was journaling through pages of rage she never knew she possessed. It was finally feeling the profound grief not for the loss of him, but for the loss of herself, for all the years she had betrayed her own soul. During this descent, she also had to confront her animus, the unconscious masculine archetype within her. For years, she had projected this inner figure onto the men she chose. She sought out men who appeared to embody the qualities she had yet to develop in herself: decisiveness, logic, assertiveness, a connection to the outer world. But because her animus was undeveloped and unconscious, she projected it negatively, choosing men who wielded these traits not as tools of partnership, but as weapons of control. They were not assertive. They were aggressive. They were not logical. They were emotionally detached. They were not decisive. They were domineering. The inner work of her awakening was to withdraw these projections, to call her power back home. She had to develop her own healthy animus. She learned to think for herself, to trust her own analysis, to make decisions rooted in her own values. She stopped looking for a man to be her rock and started becoming her own mountain. She integrated her inner masculine, not to become more like a man, but to become more fully herself, a woman who possessed both the fierce compassion of the divine feminine and the unshakable clarity of the divine masculine. She was no longer a half seeking a half. She was a universe unto herself, integrating her own sun and her own moon. This is the transmutation. This is the alchemical process of turning the lead of her pain into the gold of her wisdom. She stops fighting for attention and starts radiating presence. Her energy shifts from a frantic, grasping plea of "please choose me" to a calm, resonant declaration of "I choose me." This shift is palpable. It is the difference between a flickering candle in a hurricane and a lighthouse standing firm in the storm. She now embodies a new state of being, governed by a set of principles that are utterly alien to the world she left behind. First, and most fundamentally, she understands that wholeness is not a destination she arrives at with a partner. It is the prerequisite for a healthy one. She is no longer looking for someone to complete her because she is, for the first time, complete within herself. Her solitude is not a waiting room. It is a throne room. It is a sacred space of creativity, of contemplation, of deep connection to her own spirit. She nourishes herself with silence, with art, with nature, with work that gives her purpose. She has discovered that the relationship she was starving for was the one with herself. Secondly, her peace becomes her most precious currency, and she refuses to spend it on emotional bargains. She develops an almost supernatural ability to detect dissonance. She can feel the subtle shift in a room when manipulation enters it. She recognizes the vibration of inauthenticity. The old red flags no longer look white. They are blazing, scarlet warnings she heeds without hesitation. When a man says, "You have to accept me as I am," she hears the hidden subtext. "I have no intention of growing, and I expect you to accommodate my stagnation instead of trying to fix him, heal him, or understand him." She simply removes herself from his field. She does not argue. She does not explain. Her departure is her answer. She understands that her energy is a finite and sacred resource, and she will no longer allow it to be siphoned by emotional vampires who feed on the light of others to avoid their own darkness. Third, she masters the art of non-attachment, not as a cold detachment, but as a loving release of the need to control outcomes. She says what she means and means what she says, without apology or justification. She can express a desire, state a boundary, or share an opinion from a place of clean, centered energy. She is no longer terrified of the other person's reaction. Whether they agree, disagree, leave, or stay is their choice, their journey. Her only responsibility is to her own truth. This is the essence of emotional sovereignty. It is the understanding that she cannot control how others perceive her, but she has absolute control over how she conducts herself. This makes her incredibly powerful, because the logic of control and manipulation relies on the target's fear of abandonment. A woman who does not fear being alone cannot be controlled. She operates from a different paradigm, one that renders the old games obsolete. Fourth, her creativity, once stifled by the demands of managing a dysfunctional relationship, now flourishes. The immense energy she once expended trying to decipher mixed signals, soothe a fragile ego, or anticipate a coming conflict is now redirected inward. She paints, she writes, she starts a business, she cultivates a garden, she learns a new language. She pours her life force into creating beauty and meaning for herself. This creative impulse is the hallmark of the individuated self. It is the soul making itself visible. Her life becomes her work of art, and she is both the sculptor and the stone, chipping away everything that is not her to reveal the masterpiece that was always waiting underneath. She discovers that her purpose was never to be someone's muse. It was to be her own creator. Fifth, she becomes dangerously selective. The loneliness she once feared has been replaced by a deep appreciation for her own company. She would rather have no company than bad company. Her criteria for allowing someone into her inner circle, and especially into her intimate space, become radically stringent. She is no longer interested in potential. She is not a rehabilitation center for broken men. She is interested in reciprocity, in conscious communication, in emotional maturity, in a man who has done, or is actively doing, his own inner work. She is not looking for a project. She is looking for a partner who can meet her in her wholeness. She asks the hard questions early, not as an interrogation, but as an energetic sounding, a way to test for resonance. She observes actions more than she listens to words. She trusts the quiet, intuitive knowing in her gut above all else. This selectivity is often mistaken for arrogance by those who cannot meet her standard. They call her picky or say her expectations are too high. What they are really saying is that she is no longer willing to settle for the mediocrity they represent. And finally, the sixth and most profound shift of all. She chooses, she is not chosen. This is the ultimate reversal of the old paradigm. For most of her life, she operated from a place of passive hope, waiting to be noticed, to be selected, to be validated by the male gaze. Her sense of worth was contingent on being desired. The individuated woman reclaims this power entirely. She is the one who surveys the landscape. She is the one who decides if a connection is worthy of her time and energy. Her presence is not a question mark. It is a statement. She does not enter a room hoping to be liked. She enters a room to see who she likes. This is not an act of ego, but an act of profound self-respect. It is the culmination of her entire journey. She has moved from being the object of the story to being the author of it. The love that may or may not come into her life now will be a beautiful addition, a celebratory chapter, but it will never again be the entire plot. The core narrative is her own wholeness, and that is a story she will never, ever betray again. The emergence of this woman into the world creates a profound disturbance in the collective field. She acts as a giant, unavoidable mirror. To those who are still living in the unconscious, playing the old games of control and dependency, she is deeply threatening. Her peace feels like a judgment. Her wholeness highlights their fragmentation. Her self-possession makes their frantic need for validation look pathetic. They react with fear and hostility. They will try to diminish her, to label her, to pathologize her choice. They will call her selfish, because her self-care exposes their self-neglect. They will call her intimidating, because her strength reveals their weakness. They will call her a man-hater, because her refusal to tolerate disrespect shatters their fragile egos. She makes them uncomfortable because she represents a freedom they secretly crave but are too terrified to claim for themselves. She shatters the unspoken contract that women should be accommodating, should shrink to make men feel big, should put their own needs last. She has broken the rules of the game, and the other players are incensed. She learns to wear their projections like a loose garment, understanding that their reactions have nothing to do with her and everything to do with the parts of themselves they cannot face. She dismisses the tired societal chorus that chants, "You're too picky," or "You'll end up alone." She has looked alone in the face and discovered it was not the monster she was told it was. She discovered it was her own sacred sovereignty. She defies a world that still preaches that a woman's life story culminates in a wedding, that happily ever after only exists in pairs. Her existence is a testament to a different kind of happy ending, one of inner peace, self-realization, and unbreakable integrity. But to those who are on their own path of awakening, she is a lighthouse. Other women, who are just beginning to feel the deep dissatisfaction with the status quo, look at her and see not a threat, but a possibility. They see proof that there is another way to live. Men who have done their own inner work, who are secure in their own masculinity and value wholeness in a partner, are not intimidated by her. They are drawn to her. They recognize her light because they have cultivated their own. They are not looking for a woman to fix or to control, but for an equal to celebrate life with. She awakens two extremes, admiration and fear, and she is at peace with both. The journey of the individuated woman is the archetypal hero's journey, reimagined for the modern feminine soul. It is a radical act of rebellion in a world that profits from female insecurity. It is a spiritual pilgrimage back to the self. What she discovers in her sacred solitude is not emptiness, but presence. What she finds in her own company is not loneliness, but liberty. The love that might come for her now will be of a completely different quality. It will not be a love born of need, but of choice. It will not be salvation. It will be a celebration. It will not be two broken halves trying to make a whole, but two whole individuals coming together to create something even more magnificent, without sacrificing an ounce of their own sovereign souls. And if that love never comes, her life is no less rich, no less meaningful. Her fulfillment is not contingent on an external source. It is generated from within. She has finally understood the ultimate truth. The greatest love affair of her life is the one she has with her own soul. This is the promise of individuation. This is the quiet, unshakable power of the woman who walks away from the noise and finally comes home to herself. If something inside you is touched by this story, if a quiet whisper in your soul recognized itself in her journey, know that this is not an accident. Perhaps this video did not find you by chance. Perhaps it is a mirror, reflecting back to you a strength, a longing, and a possibility that already exists within you. This path of individuation is not reserved for a select few. It is the birthright of every soul, waiting to be claimed. It is the journey of never, ever losing yourself again. Recognize that spark. Honor that whisper. The journey begins with a single conscious choice to turn your gaze inward. If this message resonated with you, let it be more than just a passing thought. Let it be a seed. Share this video not as a simple click, but as an act of planting that seed for others who may need to hear it. Like it, not out of impulse, but as a conscious affirmation of this truth in your own life. And comment below. Share what part of this journey resonated with you the most, not for us, but for yourself, and for the community of others who are walking this path alongside you. Your voice matters. Subscribe to this channel, not out of habit, but as a commitment to continue exploring these deeper truths. Choose to surround yourself with messages that empower, that challenge, and that remind you of the sovereign, whole, and magnificent being you are meant to be.